without further ado, I am pleased to introduce a colleague of ours here at the university and welcome her to Friday morning seminar, Aram Han Sifuentes. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me and having me here today. So my name is Aram Han Sifuentes. I use she and they pronouns. I am currently the artist in resident in the art department. I'm based in Chicago, and I think I'll just jump into my presentation and you'll learn a lot more about me there. All right. Okay, so I'm an artist, and my goal as an artist is to disrupt, unsettle, and rupture dominant narratives to assert, demand, and claim space for those who are commonly othered, and particularly for immigrants of color. So we are never, never other, especially in this moment of widespread national and international xenophobia and hate. We have to really push back on multiple fronts and in as many ways as we can. So as an artist and as an arts educator, I'm constantly asked, how can art create change? What is the impact of art in social change? So over the years, I've been writing notes to attempt to answer this question, and I'm just going to make those points throughout the lecture. They're particularly intended to respond to the concerns of artists of color, and my thoughts on this are constantly ongoing and evolving. So rather than a comprehensive list, it's more of a constellation of thoughts and realizations. So through art, music, writing, we have the power to tell our own stories. These stories are not often told, actively forgotten, and are suppressed, perverted, distorted, and oversimplified by dominant culture. Through art, we tell our stories through our own lived experiences and truths on our own terms. So a little background about me is that I learned to sew when I was 6 years old. And that was the year that we moved to the United States from South Korea. So my parents came here not knowing what they would do for work. And we moved to the Central Valley in California. And there was a very small Korean community there. And someone hired them to work at their dry cleaning business. So this is my father's hands. So he works the machines, cleaning, pressing, spotting, and ironing clothes. And my mom hems and alters clothes. And my parents were able to open up their own dry cleaning store, and they still do this work today. Here's my mom's hands. So interesting fact about her is that she was formerly an artist and arts educator in Korea. So my parents work 12, 13 hours a day at work, 6 days a week, and my mom always brings sewing home with her. And they've been doing this for more than 27 years now. So we'd sit in the living room after dinner and watch TV as my mom would work on her alterations. Spending time with my mom meant sitting and sewing with her, so we would all contribute by ripping seams, ripping out bad zippers, sewing on buttons, and mending rips and holes of other people's clothes. And like I said, this is where I learned to sew. So it's from the beginning where sewing became political to me and linked to my identity. And I always see sewing from this place inside this living room, sewing with my family to make a living as immigrants in this country. So with this, in the living room, I started to collect my mom's jean cuff remnants. She hems a lot of jeans for work. And so when I got to Chicago, I came here in 2011 to get my MFA at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where I usually teach. And so when I first got here in Chicago, I brought, the handful of my mom's jean cuff remnants with me. But away from my mother, I wanted to visit those who do the same type of work in Chicago, to question what we share, how others came to do this type of work. And so I started visiting tailors and seamstresses in Chicago and collecting these scraps. So the lure of the American dream draws many immigrants who arrive who already know or quickly find out that their employment options are limited. Many end up getting jobs that offer low wages, requires repetitive manual labor, and are sometimes hazardous with no union or collective bargaining protections. And these seamstresses and tailors, like my mom, work um, hours, long and tedious hours, and oftentimes takes extra work home or to places where work is unregulated. So immigrants who are granted visas and green cards are usually educated and skilled. So why are these nurses, businesswomen, graphic designers, bankers, artists, teachers finding themselves sewing jeans for $10 and $20 a piece for over 12 hours a day? So some say my parents should be appreciative of the opportunities given to them. I don't see it that way. I see it as an exploitation of immigrants to keep the cost of handwork and manual labor low in this country. So by telling our stories, we shift the frame and put ourselves in the center. So we live in a society where most things are defined by whiteness. When we tell stories and truths from our own perspectives, we rupture white narratives and define ourselves and our experiences to ourselves and our communities. So this project, the US Citizenship Test Sampler, asks the question, who should be granted citizenship and how do we prove ourselves? I use the word sampler because samplers were used in colonial America during 18th and 19th century. They were used by teachers to teach small children as young as 5 or 6 to embroider the numbers and alphabet. So you've probably seen them. They're like pretty small and they have numbers and alphabet on them. And so they were used as a tool to learn or to teach and learn basic educational concepts. And some adolescent girls, generally from wealthy families, were able to continue their education would create another one. And it's like really decorative. It doesn't have the same format as that first sampler. And it really was to show off the values of the girl and her family to her potential suitors, right? So like showing off her worth as a wife, right? And sometimes I still hear that, like being a really excellent sewer, like, oh, wow, you must be a great wife. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, but that's where that comes from. So, so the project US Citizenship Test Sampler riffs off of these traditional samplers. So I started this project in 2012, and I started stitching the 100 questions and answers of the citizenship test. So there's 100 questions you have to study for that part of the test. And it's an oral test. They pick 10 and you have to get 6 or more correct to pass that part of the test, like I said. So I started making this. It's 8.5 inches wide and about 25 inches long. And it's on linen, and I was using cotton thread. So I started this project from practical motivations. I wasn't a US citizen, and I had to learn the test material for the naturalization test. So the project follows a few guidelines. So number 1, to sell the sampler for the cost of applying for naturalization. So I sold it in 2017, and it was, it was $680 to apply for citizenship. Now it's gone up to $725. Number 2, to log my hours of stitching the sampler. So like I said, I sold it for $680. I was on question 53 and put in about 300 hours. So I made about $2 an hour. Number 3, to apply for citizenship only if my sampler sells. So by making my application for citizenship contingent on the sale of the sampler, I let others decide if I've proven my worthiness of becoming a citizen. And with the sale of my sampler, I became a citizen in 2018. Number 4, to engage other non-citizens to each stitch one of the civics question answers. So each of these are on 8.5 by 11 inch piece of linen. And to exhibit and sell the samplers, and each work is on sale for $725, the cost of applying for citizenship. And the full amount goes to the maker of the sold sampler. So initially, I only asked participants to stitch their question and answer. However, one of my first participants asked me if he can add more decorations because he didn't think that it would sell for $680. And since then, many sampler makers have been adding pictorial elements of their own choosing and making judgments of their own invested work. So currently there's more than 120 completed samplers, and these are exhibited together to display the collective value of this community of non-citizens. And in some instances, I work one-on-one with participants, and based on the individual and educational needs to pass the naturalization test, I become a private tutor for both English and the civics questions. So I've been facilitating citizenship ready workshops at nonprofit organizations, community centers, and schools all over the United States, where communities of non-citizen immigrants come together to learn the citizenship test material through the act of sewing. And the sampler workshops organically become grassroots roundtable discussions addressing immigrant rights, labor politics, and everyday concerns of intergenerational and multi-ethnic people. It's interesting because some see the act of non-citizens studying American history and government through a traditional American craft as patriotic, while others interpret this project as politically confrontational, where the act of stitching these samplers by non-citizens represents a confrontation of a text that's inherently condescending of the immigrant community, and sewing is a gesture linked to the types of work that immigrants currently do. So in this way, the politics of the project exists simultaneously as patriotic and as political dissent and critique. It subverts a critique of the US immigration and naturalization laws and the vulnerability of immigrants navigating their way through the process. So we all know that the citizenship test is ridiculous, right? So USA News did a study in 2012 that showed that 1 in 3 Americans failed the citizenship test. I've actually found other studies that showed that 2 in 3 Americans fail the test. And this comes up every workshop, right? Why do I have to know who the president was during World War I to prove that I'm worthy of becoming a citizen? Or how many members there are in the House of Representatives? Or what year the Constitution was written? Or what does the rule of law even mean, right? Sometimes I throw it as a pop quiz, but you guys are all on mute and it's early in the morning, so I'll be kind. Of course, I picked the harder questions as an example, right? But they're pretty difficult questions, right? And, we can't forget that the Trump administration tried to make it even harder, right? They tried to increase the cost of applying for citizenship to $1,170. They tried to make it 20 questions rather than 10. And they also were trying to get rid of the easier questions and make the test much more difficult, right? Anyways, so as individuals and as a community, we non-citizens do not have the freedom to voice our protests of the conditions put upon us as immigrants without fear of repercussion. One of the requirements to become a citizen is that one has to, and it's word for word, to be of good moral character. And as we can see this happening in the Trump administration, the laws protecting immigrants are really precarious. So this is a political project that deals with questions of time, labor, work, economy, capitalism, and patriotism. From start to finish, it's about reclaiming the historical act of making samplers. The act of making samplers in it of themselves are about assessing value, the value of the skills of the woman making them. And that assessment of handwork is lost in this industrial age where embroidery and handcrafts are made by so-called invisible laborers. So this project aims to reclaim this tradition, and it's reclaiming it for the racialized immigrant working class. Immigrants often do not have time or access to make art. For example, most of the organizations and schools I do workshops at make it clear to me that they don't do arts and crafts programs because each and every workshop needs to fulfill educational components. It's a policy that makes it clear that immigrants are always expected to work to prove ourselves. Why teach immigrants how to do arts and crafts when they need to spend that time to study English, computers, work toward their citizenship? So in this project, I create this space for non-citizens where we could stitch, make art together, and make money from our work. By telling our own stories and center ourselves, we claim space. We become visible. Representation is that I see you, I am you. You're not alone. You're important. We are proud. There's something profoundly powerful about seeing the many nuances and complexities of your own story and your experiences reflected back to you. It's a sigh of momentary relief, and then we fight for more. So this is one of my favorite ways to use art is to talk back to power, particularly working with vulnerable communities such as non-citizen immigrants groups and immigrants of color. We don't often have the freedom and space to talk back to power without fear of reprisal. So art can create the space under the guise of creativity. That leads me to this project, the protest banner, Lending Library. So I started this on November 9th, 2016, following the results of the presidential election. And on that day, as many of you remember, there were protests that erupted all over the nation. And I started making protest banners and started to invite people to make banners with me. And at that same time, organizations saw that I was doing this and asked me to facilitate banner making workshops for the public. And so this is sort of how the project began. So I say the project has two parts. The first part are these free public workshops where people learn how to make their own protest banners in really simple steps using Fusible Web. So I have photo tutorials of this on my website, on my Facebook page. It doesn't require any sewing. Sewing is just an optional step. Like I said, it uses this interface, this iron-on glue for fabric, pretty much. Each banner takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to make. So the workshop skill sharing components have become importantly pedagogical. The workshops in this space they create addresses people's immediate desires to create banners for themselves and others to use in protests. It also places the skill of making protest banners in the hands of participants, where they have the skills to continue making them for themselves, their communities, and for their art practices. And these workshops have become such an important part of my practice because it's where I'm nourished. I feel immense joy and power when I make art with my communities. And in many non-Euro Western cultures, art is made collectively and not by an individual. So making art together creates space for our knowledge, connected through our lived experiences, to be shared and uplifted. These spaces of collective making become radical spaces to talk, listen, validate each other, share stories and resources, learn about the self and others, talk through our political differences, right? And playfully come up with strategies to live and fight. So the second part of the project is a physical protest banner lighting library of these banners. So it quickly turned into a library because, as you could see in my previous projects, many of the people that I make art with, right, who are my family, friends, neighbors, many of them are immigrants, and as mentioned before, many are non-citizens and undocumented immigrants who fear going to protests and don't feel safe in those spaces. So yeah, it was initially I was sort of inviting people just like hang out at my apartment and make these banners with me if you want, right? And there was a moment where there was a gathering and we all made banners and there were protests happening that week. So it was like, okay, who's going to take them out to that protest? And just no one in the room felt safe going out, right? For various reasons, right? Because they're not oftentimes they're not very accessible spaces to go, or having young children or being caretakers. It's, you can't always feel safe taking an infant out there, right? Or a lot of people, like I said, because of their immigration status, being very fearful to go. And so then I was like, wait, why did we just make these? Like, why was it important for everyone to like make one, even though like we, you, me included too, right? To like, why did we make them when we don't feel safe taking them out ourselves, right? And it was like, well, because these messages need to go out there, like our voices need to be heard, right? And the goal was always for them to be used. So I was thinking through that, right? Like that it was so important for us to make these and for it to get used. So how can I design this project so that they can go out there in the world. So I was thinking through that for a bit, and then that's how it turned into a lending library, right? Where those who feel unsafe going to protest can donate their banners to this library, where others can check out to use. So in that way, even if we cannot physically attend a protest, our voices are still heard. And those who check out the banners become allies or co-conspirators to these vulnerable communities. So with the collection of banners, we've done several residencies where we just have open hours to the public. So this one was one of our first residencies at the Chicago Cultural Center between February to May 2017. And we were open to the public for 24 hours a week over 3 months, I believe, yeah, where people can come in, make banners, check out, and return banners at any time. So as part of our residency workshop, we collect slogans and suggestions for slogans, because honestly, this is the hardest part of making a banner. And by the end of the residency at the Chicago Cultural Center, we had more than 6,000 cards. And it really became our inspiration wall. And I really enjoyed seeing the conversations develop on the wall, right? It was sort of like watching a physical Facebook thread, trolls included, right? So like on the right, give Trump a chance. No, agreed, double agreed, triple agreed, quadruple agreed. And we know it just ends there because like quintuple agree is like awkward, right? And so and our residency at the Cultural Center, as many of you guys being Chicagoans or living in Chicago at this current moment, the Cultural Center is like so central, right? And so many of the protests were happening just blocks away, right, during this time. And it was really an exciting time to have this residency there because there were just multiple protests happening every week, protest marches, political actions. And so this site became such an active hub for people to meet and make and check out banners before going out to protests. So just a lot of activists and organizing groups just heard about it and just like came. And it was really exciting. And so, these photos or this photo came from a group before they headed out to DC for the Native Nations Rise March in March of 2017. So when people make their banners, they always have the option of taking it or donating it to the project. And I always stress that use is of most importance. So if you're going to use it, take it. If you can't use it for whatever reason, consider donating it to the library for others to use. And we often do have people who make the banners, use them, and then donate them afterwards. So fabric banners have some advantages to paper and cardboard, right? Fabric banners are generally easier to transport. Many people hold them, put them on dowels, wear them as capes or aprons, or here you can see draped onto a car. And the second advantage of fabric is that they generally last longer than posters and can be reused many times. So in this way, it speaks to time. It's a bit pessimistic, but we're going to be fighting these causes for a long time. So we estimate that more than 2,500 banners have been made in our workshops. And we currently have more than 600 banners collectively in the various protest banner lending libraries in cities all over the US and beyond. And they're constantly being checked out. And as you can imagine, I have a handful of requests for people to check them out today, right? And when someone does check out banners, we take down people's email addresses and ask them to use the hashtag Purchase Banner Lending Library and return it once they're done using it so other people can check them out to use. And when they're returned, we ask people where they have been taken and used. And so this is Free Street Theater. They borrow banners for their youth production. And I think that's an interesting part of this project that I didn't anticipate as well. When I first came up with the project, I really just thought about them being used in protest marches and political actions, but they get used in conferences, public talks, presentations, performances, retreats, exhibitions, schools, classrooms, fundraiser events, parties. Sometimes people just tell me that they put it up in their room. You know, we do not have a time frame for people to return the banners, and there's no late fees. So some banners never come back, and that's some come back damaged, and that's okay. That's all a part of this movement, right? Um, so, and it's really interesting for me, looking through media coverage of protests that happen nationwide and internationally, and how often we find banners in photographs, right? So this is a photo that got shared widely in the news, or news outlets, right? And this was from the Home is Here march that happened in October, November of 2019 to defend DACA and TPS. It's important to me to think about the visual impact of banners, as well as I like that people are encountering artwork in public spaces, right? Outside of, you know, traditional art spaces, right? They're encountering art on the streets, on the pages of newspapers, and of course shared widely on social media. The words in these banners have a growing history. They're made by someone, used in a protest or other events, returned to the library, and then taken by someone else to a different protest. The banners carry the histories of the hands that made them, hold them, and the places where they've traveled. So as mentioned before, I only recently became a naturalized citizen. So in 2016, even though I've lived in the United States for more than 24 years, I wasn't able to vote. And during these presidential elections, so much that was at stake circled around immigration policy. And so I really wanted to be able to vote and have a say in what would so greatly impact the safety of my family, friends, neighbors, and community. And I started to question who can't legally vote in the United States. So I'm going to use the word disenfranchised, right? Meaning the second definition, deprived of the right to vote. And so, yeah, so the largest category of people who can't legally vote are youth under 18. Then the second largest are non-citizens, right? Including those who are undocumented. And then I found that it got muddy quickly, right? Because voting rights are so specific to state by state laws, right? And also it's really difficult because it's constantly shifting and changing, right? So the third category, third largest group, are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, depending on the state. And so the Sentencing Project is an amazing resource. So in 2016, when I first did this project, 6.1 million Americans were prohibited from voting. But actually in 2020, it's become 5.2 million people, or that's based on their estimate. So in some states, such as Maine and Vermont, incarcerated people can vote via mail, right? In 18 states, including Illinois, incarcerated people lose their right to vote while in prison, and when they come out, they regain their right. In 3 states, prison parole, 17 states, prison parole probation, 11 states are much stricter, right? And in some of these states, you lose your right to vote forever. So, for example, Kentucky, the governor is the only one who can restore your voting right. And the formerly incarcerated person has to complete an application. And like I said, it's up to the governor to accept or deny. In Virginia, anyone convicted of a felony automatically loses their civil rights, the right to vote, serve on a jury, run for office, become a public notary public, and carry a firearm. And the Constitution of Virginia gives the governor the sole discretion to restore civil rights, not including firearms. So as we know, felony disenfranchisement policies disproportionately impact communities of color, particularly brown and Black communities. Residents of U.S. territories are, I included them in as the 4th largest disenfranchised group for, so they can vote in the primaries. It's more symbolic, right, in that way, but they cannot vote for the presidential elections. And of course, we know they have non-voting members in the House of Representatives, no Senate representation. Oh yeah, and if you were born in Guam, Virgin Island, Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, or Puerto Rico, right? You're American, and to be able to vote in the presidential elections, if you move to the mainland, right, then you have access to vote for presidential elections. However, American Samoans are not U.S. citizens; they're considered U.S. nationals, so that doesn't apply to them as well. So it's like, it's pretty muddy, right? I'm going to talk a little more about that, right? And then fifth category are those without specific IDs, right? Depending on your state, because if your state requires a certain type of ID, you don't have it or you don't have access to that, then you can't vote, right? And then the sixth category are also in 9 states, there is a ban declaring those who are mentally incompetent, right? Including those under guardianship from voting. So these states are Alabama, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, South Carolina, South Dakota, Utah, and Virginia, with some exceptions. Okay, so as you can see, like I've been researching this since 2016, and I, mentioned it's been a bit difficult for me to find exact numbers for a lot of these, and because a lot of the state by state laws are shifting and changing. And so the only sort of real number I've been able to get is only from 2016, from the US election project, that showed that 28.6% of the population in 2016 was ineligible to vote. So that's about 92 million people, right? And so, like I said, I've been sort of constantly looking for the 2020 number, but haven't been able to quite put that together. And of course, this list and percentage does not even address voter suppression. It's interesting because I attended this lecture. I won't put them on blast. I won't name people, but I went to this lecture at a fancy higher ed institution that was talking about, the history of voter disenfranchisement, right? And it was all in the past tense, right? So these scholars were talking about disenfranchisement all in the past tense. So at the end, of course, I asked that question of can we talk about it? Who can't legally vote now? And I was so stunned that the panelists, these fancy scholars, right? They couldn't answer it, right? And they had no clue. And they actually gave wrong information, right? They're oh, those people who are homeless, right? And that's actually not true, right? Unhoused people in all states can vote because they could register by putting in an address of a shelter or a public park or something like that. But so they actually gave disinformation, and so that really stunned me because I've been having a difficult time finding these numbers, but then I was oh wow, these experts can't even answer it. And it just makes it clear to me that we as a society aren't even asking these questions, right? And it's whenever we learn and talk about voter access and voter disenfranchisement and fighting for expanding voting rights, it's all in the past tense, as if it's not happening now, but it is so actively happening now when it's 28.6% of the population. Anyways, so so me and my collaborator, we created some infographics around this, but as you can see, I don't have the last category on here as well. So to my point, to my next point about the power of art is that art is the language of imagination. Art allows us to imagine and present alternate pasts, presents, and futures. And through art, we can see our imaginations come to fruition. So I use art in this way to create socially engaged projects that reimagine what civic engagement can look like if it were truly made accessible to all. So I create things that I want to see and be true, like voting for all. So in 2016, I connected with Jane Addams Hull House Museum in Chicago to do the unofficial voting station, voting for all who legally can. So between September 8th and November 8th, we collaborated with more than 15 artists, activists, and organizations to create more than 25 different stations all over the US and in Mexico. And each of these voting stations took on different forms. Some were performative, used as pedagogical tools, public interactive artworks, events, guerrilla actions. And it wasn't meant to be a scientific demographic undertaking, but a series of interconnected gestures meant to empower disenfranchised people. So here's just a couple examples, right? So Cecilia Aguilar Castillo, Eric Fernandez Saldana, who live in Mexico City, did a station in Mexico City, Tijuana, and Acapulco. And their station was a lot of fun because you would come and vote for the candidates with fake blood. And then they had a station where you could vote against the candidate, right? So then they had screws and syringes and sharp objects that you can like stab into these styrofoam hens to cast your vote. In Acapulco, they went full on human effigies. Then Marianne Sadowski, who also did a station at Plaza de la Raza in LA, printed these birds on the American flag, and you would cut one out as a souvenir. This is Cecilia. She called me after the Tijuana station, and she was like, I was going to send you all the ballots and votes, but I decided I'll just throw them over the border wall instead. So that's her throwing things over the border wall. So at the Jane Addams Hull House Museum, in the spirit of freedom, celebration of difference, and fun, we wanted to create a disco theme environment where we could dance in protest. So I work with Chicago artist Lisa Holler-Bagginson on the installation, and DJ Sadie Woods created a 24-hour soundscape of protest songs. And so, yeah, you can see that I was already we were already thinking about the language of protest banners for this installation. So that's sort of how the next, right, the protest banner lending library happened as well. And so for those who can't legally vote, Election Day becomes a day where we're invisible and silent, where we get to watch the rest of the country vote. So on this day, rather than staying silent, we decided to take as much space as possible. Yeah, so to protest and dance and in loud celebrations. So on this day, we threw multiple parties and events throughout the station. So this is at the MCA Chicago with Roberto Sifuentes and DJ Sadie Woods. And we created an election viewing party where we had performances, piñatas, balloon drop in the museum. And the ballot started out, or here's the results from the 2016 official, unofficial voting station. So we had, in 2 months, we had more than 4,000 votes, and Clinton got more than 2,000 of those. Trump 278, Stein 302, Johnson 147. We had a write-in section where people can write their own. So Bernie Sanders, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama. Unfortunately, Kanye West was also in the lead there. And then we also had no votes. This is what the ballot looked like in 2016. So I'm voting here because, and translate it in the 5 most spoken languages in Chicago. You can see here, I'm voting here because I'm a kid. On the right, I'm voting here because I was given the opportunity. And the vote is for a better world where humanity prevails. So in 2020, even more felt at stake, right, in the presidential elections, including the prospect of rampant voter suppression. So to expand this project, starting in 2018, I started creating 50 voting kits for the disenfranchised. So it's a collective kit of objects made by myself and other Chicago-based artists to be distributed and for people to activate their own voting stations in all of the United States and in all over the world. Because in the 2016 elections, we just sort of mailed people the ballots and ballot box. And so I thought this was a great opportunity to create more of a kit, right? And create more of these objects that people can use or decide not to use. So yeah, so this is the ballot box, and we had 2 different type of ballots this time, a candidate ballot, and then we had a ballot on sort of voter rights issues. We just called the issues ballot. Then me and Ishita Durop, who have a collaborative project called Cute Rage Press. We created voter stickers for all, or voting stickers for all, and then undocumented projects created these. If we could vote, we would wristbands, right? Because for those who can vote, you get a sticker, you get a wristband. And those aren't just, these objects, but they're really symbols of pride, right? So we wanted to create that for disenfranchised folks. I work with Erin Delaney, who is a artist and organizer in Chicago, and we created sort of a list of actions to expand voter rights. Sadie Woods created a playlist. It's on Spotify. You could pick between a USB or a vinyl record. And this time it was super exciting because all of these songs are by Chicago musicians. And so we've had various programs where we've asked them to perform, which has been exciting. Ishta and I created infographics because we kept looking for infographics to share, but like I said, not being able to find them. So we decided we'll just create our own. So those are in the kit. William Estrada created these screen printed posters, Vote for Our Future, for children, for our community, for those who can't. And we created these in 8 different languages. Of course, your choice of banner. And so the voting kits for the disenfranchised were primarily set up in community organizations used in classrooms for students to vote and for them to activate their own voting stations, used alongside voter registration, activated by artists and installed at various museums, universities, and colleges. So this was an installation that I made the art for at MCA Denver. Here, Mural Arts Philadelphia, I worked with a student or a class, and the students created a standalone voting station structure in Love Park, which is like right across the street from City Hall, with student generated materials that highlight histories of voting rights suppression advocacy. And during for voting, the students made the signage all over polling stations in Philadelphia. And as you can remember, Philadelphia was such an important site for this election. That was super exciting. Like I said, they were used alongside voter registration. Immigrant rights organization used them. And, with Sarah Ross, so in collaboration with her, we were also able to send official, unofficial ballots into prisons in Illinois. For this project, Moto Voto, artists and community organizers Carol Zoe drove around with this ballot box attached to the back of her motorcycle and collected symbolic votes and distributed information about voter suppression, disenfranchisement, and defunding police in Los Angeles. This was for Roberto Sifuentes' Extreme Bodies performance course at the School of the Art Institute Chicago, where we asked the students to create their own voting station performances, right? And so this is Sophia and Alexis who created this kind of quilt with various responses to being disenfranchised. And then they walked around with this quilt in downtown Chicago on election day. And of course, I've been working on these kits, like I said, since 2018. And when the pandemic hit, I was pretty concerned that the project, that people wouldn't want to activate these kits. Luckily, all 50 went out into the world, and we were able to create more than 50 different voting stations all over, like I said. But due to the pandemic and its attending concerns about accessibility and safety, in the summer, I worked with Chicago new media artist John Satram, and we created this virtual iteration of the voting stations. So I'll share that website after, but it's official.unofficial.vote. So on this website, you can follow the link to vote in order to vote in 8 different languages. Like I said, you could vote for the candidates, you could write in your own candidates, you could vote for other people's writing candidates, you could vote on voter issues, you could write in your own issues, you could vote on other people's issues, and of course, answer that question, I am voting here because, right? And so that's been pretty interesting because some of the issues that people have written already include, abolish ICE, abolish prisons. I think the most voted one is cancel the Electoral College, right? We have arrest the police who killed Breonna Taylor. And under the act, it houses the different collaborating artist projects that were created for the kit. So we digitized some of them. So like the sticker, we made it into an Instagram filter. So you can like take a selfie with the sticker afterwards. And on this section, there's more developments on it where artist William Estrada and I created a downloadable curriculum and tools for educators to use in the classroom to engage students around disenfranchisement. And my Loyola class, I taught a class in the fall in the art department exclusively around this project. So students for their midterm project created different resources and projects that live on this site as well, which include a lot of really informative posters and zines, but also you can see Eric's like voting garment and like a voter swing challenge, things like that, which is super exciting. So what can voting look like if it were made more accessible? What could voting look like if the disenfranchised could be the one to determine what shows up on the ballot? The official, unofficial voting station and all of its activations create sites of empowerment, sites for protest, sites for sharing resources, sites for social engagement and discussion. It's a collective art project making disenfranchisement visible and fighting against it in the United States. So coming back to my point about imagination is that it leads to action. At its best, art can work outside or at least push against structures of capitalism, white supremacy, and power to imagine and create new worlds. Once we see these worlds, it's up to us to make them a part of our everyday. Imagination and dreams are the inspiration for action. We demand change because we see and feel different and better worlds. Imagination is what gives us hope. The seed for action are indignation with the ways things are and imagination for the ways that things can be. And I'll just go through my last project. So we live in a society where so many pathways to healing are cut off, corporatized, or just made inaccessible, including art. It's undeniable that art is a pathway to healing. And even if our society makes it hard for us to make art in our everyday lives, we must do so for our well-being. Making art in this moment is more important than ever. So since 2018, I've been thinking more and more about safety and how, I could through art talk about claiming protected spaces for immigrants and for people of color, right? So I've been putting immigrant legal resource centers red card statements onto curtains to respond to this political climate where more and more people of color are under attack by police and ICE. And these in installations are installed at entrances and exits of installation spaces to ward off authorities and to claim protected spaces for myself and my neighbors. And once you're in the space, they're filled with know your rights statements in different languages to share the knowledge with my neighbors of how to keep themselves safe. So they say, you have constitutional rights, do not open the door. If an immigration agent is knocking at the door, do not answer any questions from an agent if they try to talk to you. You have the right to remain silent. Do not sign anything without first speaking to your lawyer. You have the right to speak with the lawyer. If you're outside the home, ask the agent if you're free to leave, and if they say yes, leave calmly. Even with the know your rights and red card statements, there are risks for people, especially Black and brown people, right, to use and assert our rights to authorities. So there's always a fear of retaliation and excessive force, but what other options do we have? What's here to protect us doesn't protect us. A system cannot protect those it was never designed to protect. So in this installation at Hyde Park Art Center, portals to safety, freedom, and power were installed behind the curtains. And they were made with the Art and Restorative Justice Teen Group at Hyde Park Art Center. And we created 3 portals, one for the past, present, and future. So we came together for over a month for us, weekly, for us to collectively make these portals. This is the portal to safety, freedom, and power in the present moment. We're up against a brick wall. There's a sliver of safety, power, and freedom available to us. We're trying to get there, but we're under attack. And making this portal together in particular was healing for us to collectively dream or see the dream that we have on the other side of the brick wall. This is our future beach scene, where Black, immigrant, brown, indigenous, queer, trans, non-binary beings can be safe and at rest, where we could dance and be connected to the earth, where gems are washing up on the beach and we're dancing under a lush, gold lush palm tree that bears crystal fruit, where the skies are so clear during the day and at night you can see the planets orbiting by. And my teen collaborators included the Big Dipper in this portal in the sky, there to guide as it had in history, guiding those enslaved seeking freedom. But when can we get there? Sorry, I'm getting emotional, but it's sort of hard in the context of what's happening these days, really. But so art is integral to the ecosystem fighting for change. Making art is radical. And in our collective, making, sharing, expressing joy, and creating culture, we declare we are never, never other. We are here, we are resilient, and we will fight for our basic human rights to create a better world and just futures. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. This has been everything I hoped for, and so much more. I got to tell you, I'm feeling, yeah, I'm a little emotional here. On top of which, I also am quite frankly, be honest, nerding out. Like my synapses are firing about all sorts of possibilities, and so thank you for sharing your work and your vision, your passion. Very, very much appreciate that. And before I start to hog all the question and answers, I will cut myself off and invite folks to sort of raise your hand virtually, or if you have your camera on, go ahead and wave at me and I'll do my best to kind of see everybody. Gina, I know you're multitasking, but I know you asked a question. I can read it for you, or you can, use your own voice if you're available. Gina is our colleague at Curl, and she has a little one that she's looking after as well. So Gina's question is, first of all, thank you for the amazing art and for the presentation. She's curious to know more about how people have reacted to your art, how you feel about those reactions, and if any of those reactions have surprised you. Gina's cleaning up food all over. Yeah, we understand, Gina.
Thank you for that question. It depends on each project, but I think that, yeah, I think the main, or sort of one of the dominant reactions that I get from, dominant culture, I'll just say, or people that I'm not necessarily like, I don't get it from non-citizen immigrants of color, right? But like, because we know our realities, right? But like from the general public, where people are like, oh, right. Like we always do use that rhetoric of like, if we're angry, we all need to go protest, right? Without that sort of awareness of like that second part where it's like, oh, right, some people don't feel safe doing that, right? Or like, we all have to go vote so we can change the world, right? Which like, obviously is so important if you can't vote to vote, right? But then without that second part, right? To be like, oh, wait, we have to actually like examine voting in it of itself and like really fight for, everyone to be able to vote, because that's like, Western liberal language, right? Of like, we all can do this, but a lot of people can't, right? So I think that, I get a lot of those reactions where people are like, wow, I didn't see this. It was such a blind spot for me, right? And so, and of course, I also get a lot of the like refusing to see it as well, right? But I think like within my own communities, there's always um it's different, right? Like, so with the voting station project, it's so interesting where like, I make it the title that it is. So it makes it very clear that it's like voting for those who can't legally vote, right? But then you like go up to someone and you're like, hey, do you want to like symbolically vote? And then people are just automatically like, I can't vote, bye. Right. And you're like, wait, this is for you. And then there's like, because like people just carry that around all the time, right? Like, I can't register to vote, please don't bother me, I can't, right? And so like those are exciting moments for me when then they're like, wait, what do you mean I can vote in this voting station? You're like, it's not, it's symbolic, but it's for people who can't legally vote. And then I get sometimes surprised there where people then are like, I have a lot of like organizer and activist friends, and I have, I'm close to a friend who's undocumented and who's been organizing and like so on the ground like for the last 5 years, right? Just like constantly fighting for these things. And then he voted in the voting station. He was just like so silent for a really long time. And he was like, I I've never been able to vote. And like that, this feels so strange. And like sort of like feeling the feels. And I was like, it's not, it's just symbolic, right? But I think there's like so much power in this symbolic and in those gestures that we don't quite like talk about, right? And so even the protest banner lending library, like, I do get people who are like, I can't go to a protest, so okay, now I can make a banner. And it's like, you don't have to carry it yourself, so you can say whatever you want to say. And then there's some people are like, whoa, then I could say like, I could say these things that's been on my mind, like expletives and like all this stuff. And it's like, yeah. And then there's like so much joy and feeling of, empowerment in like such a simple gesture or such a simple thing, right? And so I think a lot about that. And I don't, yeah. And in those reactions that really surprised me in terms of like I said, how powerful art can be.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions from the folks? Christine, I think that's you sort of raising your hand.
Yeah, that was sort of me raising my hand. I mean, this was absolutely, positively wonderful, and I mean, I just can't say enough about that. I was thinking a lot about, well, one thing is, this is, in some ways, this is beyond art. I don't mean to say this as, art is, so art should be communication, but so often it's commodified, and you brought it back to being communication and empowerment and interaction between people. And it's a way for people to speak. So I just think that it's totally wonderful for that reason. I was also wondering if you've done any, if there's been any connection about how this can be a bridge to people who are disenfranchised, and there might be ways for them to become enfranchised. I mean, I'm thinking basically of returning citizens at this point. And I mean, I just think that that it just can, it's just so powerful. My mind, I guess it's sort of like David's mind. I keep, as someone who did organizing at another stage of my life, it's like, oh my gosh, how can we do this? And sort of, saying, yeah, your voice really matters, and there's a way of communicating that out to everybody. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to say that, you know, like the first part that you mentioned, that art is communication, and you don't see much art like this. Like it's, you know, I think fine art, right? In the art world, because like this happens everywhere, right? Like organizers are and communities come together to make art for protests and things like that all the time, right? It's just not considered like fine art. And I think I really, as a artist, enjoy pushing that, right? Because like art is everywhere, you know, it's just not in the art world, right? Or like sold as if it is fine art. And so yeah. And yeah, I think I am thinking about what sort of are the next stages of the official unofficial voting station, because I think these initial stages was really focused more on really education, like public education, right? And sharing this information of who's disenfranchised. And, you know, that's been powerful, because there definitely have been instances where, you know, I've talked to people and they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that, like, I'm formerly incarcerated and I didn't realize that I could vote, right? And I have been able to vote because, like, you know, there's so much bad information out there, right? And that's done on purpose, right? Because that's voter suppression, right? And so, yeah, I think this election also in 2020, I think, um, you know, Snoop Dogg only recently found out that he could vote, right? Because for years he just thought that he wasn't able to vote because of his felonies, even though in California, he's been eligible for a while now. And so even someone as well resourced as Snoop Dogg didn't even know, right? And so, like, yeah, that's happened a couple times, like I said, where I'm able to share correct information with people, right? Of like, you may not have a physical address, but you actually can still register to vote using an address of a public park or whatnot. And so that's been exciting. But yeah, and I'm thinking about the next phases. And like you said, is there more that can be done to like work toward enfranchisement, or more towards specific groups of people to like know what to fight and ask for, right? And putting more of our voices out there.
Thank you. Gina has a question. I'll go ahead and read it. Speaking of the art world and being situated partly in academia, how do you see your art as challenging academia, especially in higher ed? And then what challenges do you face in academic spaces?
Oh my goodness. Whew, that's a really good question. Yeah. I just wrote about this actually for an upcoming journal. Um, it's going to be published in the upcoming art journal, which is College Art Association's peer review journal for the summer issue. You know, I'm like, where do I even start? Right.
Feel free to say as much or as little as you wish, of course.
Yeah, I wrote about how, you know, having taught at SAIC for at a private art school since 2013, right? I'm like 8 years of teaching now. I wrote about how I've witnessed white supremacy manifest for my students of color, particularly in the art school, which, and so, yeah, I think, you know, it's really difficult, right, in higher ed, just because, I mean, yeah, I don't even know where to start, to be honest. It's really challenging for students of color, you know, for a lot of reasons, right? Because white supremacy is so part of education, and I do a lot in the spaces that I am to constantly challenge you know, like the things that I'm talking about, right? Like whose stories are we sharing, in who's centered, like in what sort of context, and are there ways that we can like push against that more and more? And I'm always pushing for those things and advocating the best that I can for you know, really advocating for more diversity and um you know, rupturing structures of and narratives of white supremacy. But it doesn't go very far, right? Because I end up exhausting myself more than anything. And I would say, like, you know, um I'll just leave it there. I'll leave it there. But thank you for that question, but it's, I don't know where to start.
No, that's fair. That's totally fair. Other folks with questions, either raise your hand virtually or put yourself on camera and wave, and I can see you perhaps. All right, I actually have a question for you about, I got 1,000, so again, I'm trying to figure out which one to give voice to. A question about working with, particularly with young people and organizations. How do you just, you know, we do collaborative community-based research, and so everything's about the partnership and about the relationship, and then the work grows from that. I'm just kind of curious, how do you establish those partnerships, particularly with young people, but just, I mean, that, feel free to expand it to other age categories. How do you do that? Obstacles, success stories, just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's trial and error, right? Of like, how do you gain the trust and how do you sort of gain entry into different communities? And so, you know, I think like I had a really hard time with the citizenship test samplers to like, you know, start doing those at citizenship, or to organizations that like have offer citizenship courses and stuff like that. Just because like when you're sort of reaching out to people and they don't know anything about you, they're like, don't want to respond, right? And then and so like, you know, just being very like um persistent, right? And I was reaching out to a lot of different places, and finally one person was just like, I think I was like, oh, I will provide all the materials and I will bring snacks and at no cost to you, like I'll bring everything. And then I think that's what convinces one person to be like, oh, okay. Right. And then through her it just opened up so much more, because then I doing the workshop there and gaining her trust there, right? And like being obviously like sensitive to like who you're working with, right? So I wasn't like showing up with like cameras or like with like video equipment or record, you know, I was like cautious at every point, right? Like, can I take photos? Can I just take photos of your hands if you're not comfortable with that at certain points? You know, just like little things. And of course, snacks and music is always like really helpful. And then, yeah. And then once I did the series of workshops with this one person, then she started recommending me to a bunch of other places that then, you know, then I had entry, right? And so I feel like, you know, it really, with different people you want to work with, right? It's just like a trial and error, and you really have to like, you learn, right? And I think young people is sort of like the easiest people to work with, in my opinion, right? Especially with the work that I make, just because like, you know, young people are, they're leading movements, like they understand justice like more than adults do, you know? And so like you know, so with like protest banners and with you know, the messages to authorities and things like that, like they're very easy collaborators to work with, and very enthusiastic collaborators to work with. Yeah.
Thanks. Suzanne, do you want to give voice to your question in the chat?
Sure. So I've reflecting on the difficulty of answering your question about what it's like to be working in academic spaces. And a whole bunch of my students from my Latinx Lit class are here today, and I'm guessing really loving hearing about your work. And so I'm wondering what you would say now to students of color who are in the academy. You like continue an academic pathway or make your own alternative spaces that might be more open?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's difficult, right? Like my own, well, I'm totally willing to share like my own story, right, in academia, right? And so like um I, usually, like I said, at the Art Institute, I teach part-time, and so I'm adjunct. We have a weird ranking system, so I'm adjunct associate, so I do have benefits, and I don't get paid terrible adjunct rates. Right? But I teach in 3 different departments. At one time I taught in 4 different departments, and my main gig is to teach English to international students at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So it's not even teaching studio art, right, that most people imagine that I would. And and my priority is, and like I think I at one point I was like, why do I teach in so many departments? And then one of them, ended up being like a terrible toxic work environment that I had to leave, right? And so that made sense to me, where I was like, oh, I teach in so many departments so that like this is my stability for me, right? As a person of color, like experiencing retaliation for like pushing back on like these white narratives, and like, you know, like this is, I had to leave and I was fine because I had 3 other departments to go to, right? Right. And I always go back and forth about like, do I want a full-time job in teaching? Because I absolutely love teaching. Like that is like clear to me, right? And gets more and more clear to me. And you can see it in my art practice. Like it's all about pedagogy, it's all about teaching. And like I absolutely love it. And I think I'm good at it. And I've applied to full-time positions a couple times, and they haven't gone so well, because I am very outspoken, and because, I'll just say it frankly, like, I don't think I've ever interviewed with a person of color in the room. The committee has always been a room full of white people, right? And asking me crazy things. Like one interview, they asked me, it was like, this was an exact question, like, what do you feel about diversity? And I laughed for a good minute, right? Suzanne, I see you laughing. I laughed for a good minute. And I was like, this is why I can't get a job, because I just laughed at their question for a minute because I couldn't help myself. Right. And so, for me, I'm not sure, and like my really dear friend, who teaches, who's a professor at UCLA in the Women and Gender Studies department and Asian American Studies, Grace Kyung Wong Hong. She literally writes about how women of color in academia die earlier deaths because being in and constantly fighting and constantly experiencing this toxic workplace, right, is like makes a toll on your health, right? And I see that, like, a lot of my mentors who are women of color are like not doing so great with their health in their lives, right? They're deeply committed, they're fighting all the time for their institutions to be better, for their departments to be better. They take on such big burdens, and like it's so unrecognized, and like they like end up getting, a really close friend of mine is like has cancer right now, right? And it's like, and I see that all the time. So for me, I think I, like, and having this year position in Loyola has been really amazing and healing in a lot of ways, that like, oh, this like academic space actually wants me here, you know, and accepts me here, right? I got invited and it's for 1 year, right? But like it's been a wonderful year because they want me here, right? And so like I think those are some of the questions that, you know, people of color have to ask ourselves when entering these situations, right? So I'm not saying don't do academia, like don't go into those spaces, but like I think it just is case by case in terms of like, you know, what sort of boundaries can you set, you know, if it feels a certain way and is very toxic, you really have to preserve yourself. And maybe that is when you leave to another institution, or maybe you create your own, like you say. But it's really case by case. And I am hopeful that things, you know, that a lot of institutions are working hard to, you know, have their diversity, inclusion, and equity, or equity inclusion, like as they're really working hard on those initiatives. And I'm really hopeful that some of them, at least some of them, make some real changes so that it isn't such toxic spaces for people of color, right? And so like for me, what I figured out for myself is that, you know, there's nothing like my art practice that nourishes me, that empowers me, that gives me joy, right? And so, and I love teaching, right? So like the part-time teaching 2 days a week and then having the rest of the week, you know, to really commit to my art practice is really wonderful, and I really love it, right? And so like that works for me. And so I think, you know, we just have to figure out like what works for you as individuals of color in, you know, not so great academic spaces. It's a really long answer, but yes. I hope I answered it.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne, for asking it, and Aram, thank you for giving yet another honest and complex answer, because I think it is a complex kind of question and answer. So thank you. Other questions? All right.
Question.
Oh, yeah, Emily.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you have any art projects and like where we can find some of your work out in the wild. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let me share some of those links. So that is the official unofficial .vote website. It's still open for voting. I'm not sure when I'll close it, but we still have like boxes of ballots to input. So it's still open. And then I'm currently the artist in resident at Mocha Cleveland, and they I like sharing this website because they have like individual kits or envelopes with like the voting station swag, right? So like stickers and wristbands and stuff like that. And so if you give them your mailing address, they'll ship you this kit for free. So if you like receiving free stuff in the mail, and they won't, I've asked them, I was like, they're not going to be on any listserv where you then spam them. They said no. So and then yeah, and then I'll have an exhibition at Mocha Cleveland in December, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram, where I post most of my events. I have sometimes on my website, you could check that out, but I'm not the best at updating my website. I also have a 5-year-old, so my life is pretty full. So the website doesn't get prioritized as much. But yeah, thank you. And, you know, like I said, I'm making a bunch of protest banners right after this because, you know, there's a lot of requests today.
All right. Thank you so much. This has been, as I think Emily Jones noted earlier, like such good timing for this, for your presentation, to hear more about your work. Thank you. It's been a real gift, and we are grateful for that. We're going to go ahead and I'll make sure that we have those websites, and we'll put that up. When we put the video up, we'll embed that in there and in other places. So we will make sure that we spread the word far and wide, or at least as far and wide as Curl audiences go. So thank you again, and I would love to say see you on campus, but see you somewhere in Chicago soon, I hope. And thank you for joining us, and thank you everybody for joining us. We have one more Friday morning seminar next week, and we would welcome you all back to that as well. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.